Hi guys, welcome back to my life as Roxy, and today's video is a true crime video and it is part 2 of the Jeffery Dahmer case. If you've been following my channel, then you would know that I'm currently covering the Jeffery Dahmer case, which is the cannibal serial killer, and this is part 2. So if you're new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button and hit the likes button as well so that my video can get noticed, and that would really help me a lot, so I would appreciate that a lot. So let's get to part 2 now guys. If you see me changing outfits, just know that this video was filmed on separate days because this whole Jeffery Dahmer case just took me way longer than I expected, because this time I'm not only covering one person and what one person did, or the murder of one person. It is the murder of several different people, and 17 different people will be covered in the story of Jeffery Dahmer. Now I'm not gonna name the victims in my videos. That is for my safety. I know that back in the day people were sued because they mentioned the names of the victims in a video, so I am just, or in their movies and stuff like that, so I'm just trying to avoid that whole fiasco. So yeah, here's part 2 of the Jeffery Dahmer case. After Jeffrey's fourth victim, he tried in April 23, 1988. He lured another victim, or another man, to his grandmother's house, and he gave the man coffee that had sleeping pills or drugs inside. And basically, when he already gave the man the coffee with the drugs inside, his his grandmother kind of noticed that there was someone inside the house. So what his grandmother then did was call out his name and said, is according to him, he said that his grandmother said, "Is that you, Jeff?" So he then answered his grandmother in a way just to kind of like reassure her that he was alone. But I think at that time his grandmother didn't really believe that he was like home alone, or that he was alone. I think she thought that he was with someone. So that particular day, Jeff then decided not to murder his victim. What he then did instead was, because his victim was already drugged, like I know at that time the victim also heard his grandmother calling. So I think the victim was a little bit drugged. So what he did at that time is he took the victim in the car, or his car, grandmother's car, I'm not really sure, took the victim in the car and then drove the victim to County General Hospital. Yeah, County General Hospital, and he left the victim there. So in September, yeah, that happened in April, and in September 1988, Jeffrey's grandmother asked him to move out, because I think at that point she was just so tired, because he was always bringing home these young boys, and she was tired. According to him, she was tired of the smells, like the foul smells coming from the basement as well as the garage. And I read a source that said at that specific time, Jeffrey's grandmother even called Jeffrey's father, Lionel Dahmer, to come check out the basement and find out what was like wrong. And then Jeffrey's father discovered like a blackish substance. Now according to the source, that this blackish substance was kind of like when you dissolve flesh, and this was the substance that was found by Jeffrey's father. But I think at that point Jeffrey's father was so used to Jeffrey doing dissolving and being interested in dissecting animals, and he taught Jeffrey this in a very young age. So he knew that Jeffrey was really interested in doing this thing. So I think he just brushed it off, and with the fact that he just thought that no, it was just an animal. So yeah, nothing came from that. And Jeffrey moved out of the house, and yeah, moved out of the house in September, the 25th of September. Jeffrey moved out of the house, but the next day Jeffrey got arrested because he was sexually fondling a 13-year-old male child. And this is so sad because not only is Jeffrey a cannibal, a murderer, and all these is like a serial killer, he's also a pedophile, because this is now the second time that he's been involved with a child, or third time that he's been involved with a child. But anyways, Jeffrey got arrested at this time, and in January 1989, he appeared in court, and his sentencing was postponed to May 1989. So in March 1989, Jeffrey then moved in back with his grandmother. I don't really know why he decided to move back with his grandmother after his grandmother asked him to move, but Jeffrey moved back to his grandmother. Now his sentencing was supposed to be in May, but in March he moved back to his grandmother. And 2 months before Jeffrey's sentencing, Jeffrey then took the life of his first victim, which was a 24-year-old mixed race aspiring model. And Jeffrey met this man at the bar. According to Jeffrey, he was just at the bar. He wasn't really trying to commit a crime that specific day. And this victim came, he just started speaking to Jeffrey. According to Jeffrey, he just started speaking to Jeffrey once the bar was about to close. So Jeffrey then lured him back to his grandmother's house, and there is where the two had I'm not really sure, like I'm gonna put it in the screen if I'm incorrect, but they had oral sex. He said oral sex, and then Jeffrey drugged and strangled this particular victim. After Jeffrey strangled his fifth victim, he then the following day took the body of the victim and put it in his grandmother's bathtub and attempted to flay the victim, as well as he decapitated the victim. He then removed all the flesh from the bones, and then also pulverized the bones and got rid of all the flesh as well as the bones in the trash. But this was like, according to Jeffrey, he found this victim exceptionally attractive, and this was like the first victim that he permanently retained. He took the victim's skull as well as the victim's private parts, the genitalia, and then put it in acetone in a jar, and he kept this jar or this head and genitals of this victim with him in his work locker. And when he moved the following year, he also took this head as well as the genitalia with him. So Jeffrey was then sentenced on May 1989. He was sentenced 5 years probation and 1 year house of correction with work release, and this was done so that Jeffrey could still keep his job. After Jeffrey's release on May 14, 1990, Jeffrey moved into the Oxford's apartment in 25th North Street. I think this area is very famous because of Jeffrey at this moment. There's like a route you can take to just see all the places that Jeffrey murdered his victims. So I think that area is very famously known for Jeffrey's murders. So this apartment was 213. Jeffrey then moved into this apartment. A week after he moved into this apartment, Jeffrey lured a 32-year-old male prostitute to this apartment under the pretense that he would have sex with Jeffrey, and then he would give this man a $50. But then Jeffrey drugged this man, gave him in 7 sleeping pills with a drake laced with 7 sleeping pills, and then manually strangled this 32-year-old male prostitute. After that, Jeffrey then took this man's body in a bathtub and dismembered the body, and then took the arms, the legs, as well as the pelvis, arms, legs, and pelvis, and put it in the steel kettle with soy legs, and then boiled his body parts, the arms, legs, and the pelvis. This made it really easy for Jeffrey to rinse off the flesh from the bone into the sink. I'm not really sure, but it made it easy for him to like rinse off the bones. And after that, Jeffrey then took the remainder of the skeleton and he put it in an acid solution in a big blue, I think it was in that big blue, I'll show a picture of it. It is in that big blue container. He put the skeleton in that big blue container, and he then dissolved the remainder of the skeleton with, this is not excluding the head, excluding the head. He then removed the flesh from the head. I don't know, I'm not really sure at this point what method Jeffrey used to remove the flesh from the skull, but after he removed all the flesh from the skull, he spray painted the skull gray, and then placed the skull next to his previous victim in a filing cabinet on a black towel. I also want to mention that before he dismembered this victim, the following day, the 6th victim, the following day, he then went to buy a Polaroid camera, and he took suggestive poses. He took pictures of the victims in suggestive poses, and took pictures of the dismemberment process. This was the first victim that he actually took pictures of. So a week after that, Jeffrey then found another victim, but fortunately for this victim, he managed to get away, because Jeffrey then accidentally drank from the concoction that he used to make to drug these victims. He accidentally drank from this, and then he drank from this, and then he passed out. So at the end of the day, Jeffrey and this victim was both passed out. The next day when Jeffrey woke up, he found out that the victim, or the person that he intended to murder, then stole all some clothing and stole $300. But he never reported this incident to the police, because obviously he doesn't want to put himself in any because if you call the police, they will probably come investigate and search your apartment to collect evidence, and that Jeffrey just didn't want that. So after that, Jeffrey, I'm going to put the date on because I can't remember this date specifically. Jeffrey, it was in June. Yes, it was in June. Jeffrey then invited an acquaintance, or lured an acquaintance of him. It was a 27-year-old male. He lured him to the apartment, and then also gave him one of those drinks laced with drugs, and then the victim passed out. Jeffrey then also strangled this victim. But Jeffrey's thought process with this victim was very different from the other victims. Jeffrey then put the skeleton in the freezer, as well as the head also. Jeffrey's intention was to kind of dry out the skeleton. I don't know how he thought that putting something in the freezer would dry it out, because he didn't want it to retain more moisture. But obviously this wasn't successful, so Jeffrey then took the skeleton and then dissolved it in the acid solution in the container as well. Then Jeffrey then took the head, because in the process of attempting to dry the head, he took the head and put it in the oven because he wanted to dry the head, but this didn't work as well, and the head ended up exploding. Jeffrey then later explained to when he was caught and later explained that he felt like really rotten about this particular victim because he couldn't retain anything from this victim. He couldn't keep any skeletons, scar. He couldn't keep anything because, and he just felt bad because he couldn't keep anything from this specific victim. 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks after Jeffrey murdered his previous victim, Jeffrey then met a 22-year-old. Yes, 22-year-old. If the age is not correct, obviously I'm going to put it on the screen. He met a 22-year-old native, Chicago native, and he then lured this man back to his apartment, or this man agreed to go with Jeffrey to his apartment under the pretense that Jeffrey could listen to the man's heart and stomach. And when this man when Jeffrey then attempted to give this man oral sex, he then told the man that it would cost more. Now, different sources claim that at this point Jeffrey got irritated and angry at the man, and he gave this man a drink with sleeping pills as well. But this time he only had like 2 sleeping pills left. So then he slashed the artery on the throat of this victim, and he bled out in a few minutes. After Jeffrey then did this, he then took the victim and took a lot of pictures of this victim in suggestive poses. And yeah, so then after this, Jeffrey then dismembered his victim. He removed the heart and some biceps and put it in his freezer for later consumption. I think at this point Jeffrey started eating the flesh of his victims. He took then the remainder of the flesh and boiled it in a Soilex solution in order to make it easier for him to like rinse the flesh of the bones. He then took the bones and put it in bleach for I think 24 hours, or 24 hours after, or he put the bones in the bleach for 24 hours in order to preserve the bones. Then Jeffrey then also took the head and removed the flesh from the head, and then coated it with enamel and spray painted it. 2 to 3 weeks after Jeffrey Dahmer murdered his previous victim, he met a 22-year-old male at Grand Avenue Mall. Yes, Grand Avenue Mall. Jeffrey met a 22-year-old male at the Grand Avenue Mall, and this was his next victim. What Jeffrey Dahmer then did, he invited this man for drinks. What Jeffrey Dahmer then did, he told this man that I'm going to give you a $50 if you come to my apartment and I take photographs of you. I'm not really sure whether this was naked photographs or just normal photographs, but this man left with Jeffrey Dahmer and went to his apartment. Obviously, Jeffrey did what he normally does, and he gave this man a drink with sedatives. And when this man was unconscious, Jeffrey said that he didn't find this man attractive. So this whole luring this man back was so unnecessary. Not that I'm saying that the other murders were necessary, but Jeffrey didn't even find this man attractive when he finally drugged the man. So he was scared. He actually wanted to let this man go, but he was scared if this man would wake up, he would be furious at Jeffrey for drugging him. So he just strangled the man and then strangled him and dismembered his body. Now, with this victim, he didn't retain any body parts because he didn't find his victim attractive. So he just took photographs of the victim and the dismemberment process. These photographs were later used to identify the victim. So for the first time, Jeffrey wasn't really attracted to his victim, and yeah, and he didn't retain any body parts of this particular victim. So after this victim, Jeffrey, for 5 months, Jeffrey attempted to lure men to his apartment, but he was unsuccessful. It was like 5 months. He didn't really murder anyone. He didn't lure anyone to his apartment. And this was also the time that Jeffrey complained towards his probation officer that he was suffering from depression and anxiety. That was the remainder of 1990. So Jeffrey was just like, I think maybe that's what affected everything. I'm not really sure, but in 1990, from February, things just went downhill for Jeffrey, and that's where he really got sloppish with his victims, and he just spiraled out of control. He was like almost like he was murdering victims, like one victim after another every single week. So yeah, 1991 was like a really rough year, because that was like one of the years that Jeffrey, I think he took most of his victims in 1991. So after Jeffrey was unsuccessful with the last remainder of the 1990 till February, Jeffrey then in the beginning or middle February, Jeffrey then lured another victim, a 17-year-old man that he met near a bus stop near Marquette University. I'm not really sure if I'm pronouncing this name correctly. So yeah, he lured this man to this from this bus stop near the university to his apartment with what he told the man is that I'm gonna give you money if you post nudes, and with added incentive of sexual intercourse. But when they arrived at the apartment, Jeffrey did what he normally did, and he drugged his victim. After he drugged this victim, he took photographs of the he drugged this victim, and then he strangled the victim with a leather strap. He then dismembered the victim and retained the skull, the hands, as well as the genitals of the specific victim. I don't really know why he collected so many body parts from this specific victim. It wasn't elaborated why he did it, because I think this is like the first time he really had hands of victims. I'm not really sure, but yeah, he did this with his victim. And yeah, that was after Jeffrey was unsuccessful for 5 months. By for That was after Jeffrey was unsuccessful by luring men to his apartment for 5 months. On April 7, 1991, Jeffrey met another victim. This was a 19-year-old victim that this man went to get his key cut, and Jeffrey lured him to his apartment. I am really not sure how Jeffrey did eventually lured this victim to his apartment, because according to Jeffrey, this male was a heterosexual. So when Jeffrey got this victim to his apartment, he drugged him, and what he then did to this victim was very different than what he did to his previous victims. Jeffrey then drilled a hole in this victim's skull when he was passed out drugged, and he poured hydrochloric acid into the hole where he drilled the hole in the skull. He poured in hydrochloric acid into this hole. Now, the purpose of doing this, Jeffrey wanted to basically create zombies. So he wanted to have a person that was alive but was unresistive in a submissive state. So this was him experimenting on this man for the first time to actually create zombies. this man, Jeffrey, is just, the deeper I get into the story, I just realized that this man was just like sick to the core. Because how can you want to create zombies? It's just a bit too much. But this victim woke up during Jeffrey's experiment, and the victim asked him what time it was, and he told Jeffrey that he had a headache. And with this, Jeffrey drugged the victim again and strangled him. He then decapitated the victim and retained the skull of the victim, and also flayed the victim, where this is the process of removing skin from the victim's body. Now he wanted to take the skin from the victim and just keep it. So what he did is he put the skin in a bottle with cold water and salt. He kept this for quite a while, but later on, he said that the skin became very brittle, so he had to throw it away. After this victim, say later on or the beginning of 1991, the residents of the Oxford apartments where Jeffrey was renting, as I mentioned earlier in my previous video, this resident started complaining to the landlord or the building manager that this that there was just like a very very bad smell coming from Jeffrey's apartment, as well as objects falling and a chainsaw. Now, if this wasn't like really enough evidence for the landlord that something sketchy was happening in Jeffrey's apartment, then I don't know. But maybe it was back then, people didn't really think of those things. So yeah, the building manager then contacted Jeffrey several times throughout 1991. Not really sure in the beginning, at the end of 1991, but Jeffrey was contacted a few times by his landlord, and of course he had excuses for why there was this bad smell in his apartment. The first time he said uh, that his freezer broke and that the content inside the freezer spoiled, so that was the reason for the bad smell. And then later on, when his landlord called again, he said that, what did he say? He said that several of his tropical fish had died, and that was the reason why there was this bad smell. Now, I really don't know, when your tropical fish die, you don't keep it in the tank for a long time. So I don't really understand the reason behind this bad smell because of tropical fish. But I think at this point, the landlord was so busy, he didn't really want to go there and check it out, because if he did, he would have found why there was this bad smell in Jeffrey's apartment. So in 26th of May, 26th of May 1991, this story, or talking about this part, is very very sad, because this particular murder could have been avoided. Now, what happened to this victim? It was a child, it was a 14-year-old boy, and ironically enough, that this victim was the relative of, or brother of, the boy that's Jeffrey, I think the 13-year-old boy that Jeffrey molested in 1988. So basically, Jeffrey hurt two family members, one that is, of course, alive, and the second member that had his life removed because the cops didn't do their work. So what happened at this particular time? Jeffrey met this boy, and he lured this boy back to his apartment by asking him if he would post for pictures, and yeah, if he would post for pictures. And yeah, what Jeffrey then said, that this boy didn't want to go at first, And then he just decided to accompany Jeffrey. So when he got there, he took two pictures. Jeffrey took two pictures of this boy in his underwear, and then later on drugged the boy and had oral sex with the boy, or performed oral sex on this boy. And yeah, what he then did while the victim was unconscious, he was talking. I'm not really sure whether he was talking with the victim or what he was doing, but he decided that he's going to go out and get some more beer, and he left the apartment for some reason. I'm not really sure what his thought process was, but I think at that time the Jeffrey's whole thing just spiraled out of the control, because what I can remember reading is that at this particular time that Jeffrey lured this boy to his apartment, there was already a corpse of his previous victim that he just murdered 3 days before he took this boy to his apartment. I'm not really sure what happened at this particular time, why Jeffrey left this man alone at his apartment, or this boy. I don't want to say man because it's still a child. Then Jeffrey went to the bar, and I think somehow, yes, before Jeffrey went, let me just explain what happened when the boy came to Jeffrey's apartment. Now, there was a corpse inside the house, but because Jeffrey also then this was also the second victim that he drilled a hole in and put some hydrochloric acid into the skull. So I think when this boy was so drugged out, and he saw the corpse of the 32-year-old man that Jeffrey did murder previously, but he didn't really respond to it because I think he was so drugged out, and he didn't really respond to it. So he passed out, and while he was passed out, Jeffrey was like laying next to him, and I don't know, this is when Jeffrey decided that he was gonna go out and have some drinks. So I don't know the thought process behind this, but Jeffrey left this victim alone at his apartment. I probably think that he thought that the victim would die. I'm not really sure. But when Jeffrey came back from the bars or getting his drinks, he found three ladies talking in another language, Lao, yes, to this 14-year-old victim, because the 14-year-old victim got out of the apartment and was at the porch butt naked talking to these three women. So Jeffrey went to these people, and he tried to explain to them that he knew this guy, and in his attempt to lure the guy back to, or the boy back to his apartment, the ladies told him no, they should wait because they already called 911. So two officers then came to the apartment while Jeffrey was there with the boy and the three women. But of course, you know, the officers were on Jeffrey's side, and Jeffrey lied to them and said that it was his partner or boyfriend, and that they were having a lover's quarrel, and that the guy was drunk. Now, because this guy was drugged out and had hydrochloric acid on injected in his skull, he was kind of out of it. He couldn't really talk. So yeah, the cops believed Jeffrey. And when the woman, one particular woman, well, she was like really upset and told the police that the boy was bleeding from his behind, and that the way that the boy was behaving wasn't normal, because when Jeffrey tried to take the boy back to his apartment, the boy was not into this. He was very resistive. He didn't want to go with Jeffrey, and Jeffrey struggled with the boy. And she tried to explain this to the police officer, but he didn't want to listen, and he told the woman to shut up and butt out. So they believed Jeffrey's story, and they took Jeffrey with the boy to the apartment, and to show they wanted Jeffrey to show proof that they were actually in a relationship. Now, if you look at this particular victim's photos, you would see that this boy was really young. He was 14-year-old. he was 14 years old. And so you could see that this guy wasn't a boyfriend of Jeffrey Dahmer, because in 1991 Jeffrey was 31 years old. So obviously they were not boyfriends or life partners, and because this particular victim was like 15 years younger than Jeffrey. But what Jeffrey then eventually did is he took the photos that he took the previous night with him with a boy, or with a boy alone in underwear, and he showed it to the officers. And the officers then handed the boy with a towel over to Jeffrey and left the boy there. It is so sad, and it's really difficult for me to talk about it, because I feel like in this instance the officers really failed this boy, because if they did look into Jeffrey's past, or if they did search Jeffrey, they would have seen that Jeffrey was a sex offender, and that Jeffrey previously tried to, or that Jeffrey previously molested another 13-year-old boy, and they probably wouldn't have left the boy there. Now, later on, the officers did admit that there was a foul smell coming from the apartment, and what they did is just look around the corner to see if there was anything suspicious in the apartment. Jeffrey said they did look into this particular room, but because the police officers were not really attentive, they missed the corpse that was already inside, because the reason why the police officers got the bad smell was because there was already a decomposing corpse inside the apartment. So this case, or this story, particular story of this 14-year-old boy, is very, very sad. And the one of these ladies that found him that particular day is still very angry, because she felt that this the death of this boy could have been avoided if the police officers just listened to her. Jeffrey then, in I think June 30th. Yes, June 30th, Jeffrey traveled to Chicago, and he met a 20-year-old man, and this was Jeffrey's next victim. What he basically, I think he told this particular victim, I'm not really sure, but I know that he lured this victim to his apartment in the pretense that he would have for a professional photo shoot. So Jeffrey lured this particular victim to his apartment for a professional photo shoot in Milwaukee, and this victim then, this 20-year-old male victim, agreed to accompany Jeffrey to his apartment in Milwaukee. When they arrived in Milwaukee, Jeffrey then drugged, strangled, and decapitated and removed his internal organs, and put the head and the organs in a separate plastic bag in the freezer. 5 days after this, Jeffrey then lured another victim to his apartment. I just forgot this victim's age, so I'm going to put it on the screen. Jeffrey lured this victim to his apartment. He also met this victim at a Chicago bar. He lured this victim to his apartment by telling the victim that he would spend the weekend with this particular victim. And yes, the victim agreed, or this particular man agreed to accompany Jeffrey to his apartment. He then drugged this man and then injected boiling water. He drilled a hole and injected boiling water into this victim's skull twice. Now, I know it's a little bit different. I think he was experimenting, because the first time Jeffrey did use hydrochloric acid to inject into his victim's skulls, but I think with this he saw that his victims passed away very quickly, and then he moved over to boiling water, which he did with this particular victim. This victim went into a coma for 2 days, and then eventually, with this particular victim, Jeffrey tried to prolong the time that he spent with this victim. So he used chloroform. Chloroform. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad at pronouncing these words. Whatever he used, this particular substance, we're all familiar with it, to basically render this victim unconscious so that he could spend more time with this victim. But he was unsuccessful, and then later on he murdered the victim. He had raped the corpse of the victim. I'm not going to say have sex because it's rape. You call it rape, you call it what it is. He raped this victim, and then dismembered the victim, where he took the heart and the head and put it in the refrigerator, and he took the torso of this particular victim and put it in the freezer. Jeffrey then later on, I think this was his last victim. He is his last victim. Jeffrey then met 25-year-old victim, which he lured back to his apartment. Now with this particular victim, like before this, Jeffrey's last victim, before murdering Jeffrey's last victim, he did ask for a leave of absence from his job when he was busy murdering his previous victim. They did grant him a leave of absence, but later on they informed him 4 days afterwards that he was fired from his position at the chocolate factory. So Jeffrey, in the state of being fired, Jeffrey then met the 25-year-old victim, and he lured him back to his apartment, did the same thing that he normally does, and then left this victim on his bed covered with sheets. But while he was doing this victim was basically decomposing on Jeffrey's bed. So basically Jeffrey just like got really sloppish with what he was doing, and I think a few days after that, Jeffrey then took the torsos of all these victims that he murdered in the last days, and he then acidified, yeah in his blue barrel with acid, and that's how he got rid of the bodies of the last victims. Now with the next video, I'm going to share the arrest of Jeffrey Dahmer, and that is going to be the last part of my Jeffrey Dahmer series on a serial killer. I'm obviously going to do another video of serial killers, but with just this particular Jeffrey Dahmer case, I just saw that it is so exhausting to like do a case on serial killers, because especially because there's so many victims involved. But yeah, you guys will see me on my next video where I'm going to talk about the arrest of Jeffrey Dahmer. So don't miss that out. That is like the part where things get really juicy and where we all get justice for what Jeffrey did to a lot of young innocent men that still had their whole lives ahead of them. So yeah, bye.